I've been with IMAGINiT I just hit my 15-year milestone, but prior to IMAGINiT, I worked in industry, both in design with a focus on architecture and a bit of construction as well. Been with the partner channel supporting Autodesk for the last 15 years, so really know the inner workings of a lot of different industry segments, from architects, engineers, general contractors, subcontractors, specialty consultants. But my role really right now is focus on managing the Autodesk construction solutions, and really it kind of lends to the subject today, which is some of the major pain points we're seeing in industry with clients and customers that are using different solutions in construction projects, and really how to streamline those tech stacks and streamline your own internal workflows when you are happening, or when you happen to be working with external folks that might be using solutions that you're not using. So with that, I'll go ahead and share the agenda. So I want to start with a background, kind of what led us to this solution. Then I'll get into some technical definitions. It's something that's come up. I know we throw out a lot of terms around sort of the programming side of stuff when we're talking about integrating solutions. So I'll go through some definitions quickly, because I'll probably refer to things like APIs and webhooks throughout this presentation. And I just want to make sure that everyone has sort of a foundational understanding of what I mean when I say something like an API. So I apologize if you're already very familiar with that. I'll get into our solution that we've created to eliminate some of these data silos and improve your workflows. Then I'll get into the detail of the actual solution and the workflows that we currently support, the services around those solutions, and then finally we'll have probably a good time at the end for me to answer any questions you might have about our product, our services, the workflows, you name it, any questions. I will advise you, if you do have questions, please throw them into the Q&A, and Sarah will kind of monitor that. I'll open it at the end. I have access, or I should have access, to view those questions, and I'll just kind of drill through them towards the end of the presentation. All right, so getting into our background, as more and more of our customers have started to move to the Autodesk Construction Cloud, we understood that there are many outside applications for construction that need to really be communicating or sharing information to these, we'll call them construction management solutions or project management solutions. Obviously, the primary one that we support here at IMAGINiT is the Autodesk Construction Cloud, Autodesk Build, Cost Management. But we have a number of clients that really support both Procore solutions, Autodesk solutions, and then you might even sprinkle in some others like eBuilder, some Newforma, et cetera, et cetera. So our goal as a service provider and a technology provider was to create our own internal solution that we could provide to really eliminate some of those pain points that lead to things like redundancy of data entry or manual data entry in two different tenants, Procore and ACC. So what we really came up with, oh, and I should also mention that third point there, also very important. Why are we manually entering in data in two places? Well, the desire of our clients to own their own information. You know that when you're brought into a project, whether you're the general contractor or a subcontractor or a consultant to the project, you might have one piece of that project, but you don't want the owner, the developer, the general contractor to own the data that you're responding to, including files, attachments, and the like. So the desire for our clients to have their own redundant data source that they sort of maintain and that they own forever in perpetuity was a real pain point. And even if you're using the Autodesk Construction Cloud and you get invited into a general contractor's construction cloud environment, The bridge functionality in ACC is limited to only a certain amount of tools, and we saw an opportunity there for us to develop a solution that really supports more than what the native Autodesk bridge function supports. So that's really the background that led us to our solution, which I'll mention in a couple of slides. But before I do that, because I will be talking a lot about the mechanisms that allow this exchange to happen between different data sources, I've included this brief definitions page. So if you're not already familiar with APIs, I've just posted a definition that I pulled from Google into the slide deck here. Basically well, maybe not every application, but most of the applications that we use, whether they're desktop solutions or services or software as a solution, like these cloud products, they have these things called APIs. And the APIs are really just a set of rules and protocols that allow different software applications to communicate and exchange data between each other. So anytime you hear about one program speaking to another, interoperability via integration, chances are the programming, the backend, is using some form of API calling to make that process happen. In particular, with these cloud-based solutions, we have RESTful or REST APIs, which allow us to transfer the data between different servers, in this case, cloud-based servers. And 4 of the main types of REST APIs that we have are listed here. So I wanted to kind of make a connection between API terminology and what you might be more familiar with from like a file standpoint. So get, post, patch, and delete are kind of the equivalents of read only when we're talking about getting data or getting information. That means we have the ability to read that data. So if we have a get API, maybe in one environment, you have a field. It could be as simple as an RFI title or RFI name. If we have a get API, that means that through the API, through the programming, we have the ability to read that data and report what the name of that RFI is. Post allows us to actually create new elements. So even if something doesn't already exist, post APIs allow us to create them in, we'll say, a destination environment. Patch is just the term to update existing data or modify something that already exists. And then a delete API obviously allows us to remove it. So very, very basic 101 type of stuff there. But if you hear me talking about limitations on APIs, that just means that whatever we're trying to do or whatever the goal is, if you're wondering, well, why don't you just do that? It's not that we don't want to do it. It's because we don't have the APIs to be able to do it. So when I go through the limitations on the solution, I'll address which APIs we may potentially have, and I'm sure there might be some questions about that at the end. I can provide a quick link to both the Procore and the Autodesk Construction Cloud API field guides, and that might give you a better idea of some of the limitations and guardrails, constraints that we have in developing our solution. Beyond that, a webhook. So webhooks are really just an automated real-time communication system where if someone opens an item, that webhook is basically a constant stream that's looking for activity, and as soon as an activity happens, we're able to process it. This will come into play a little bit later in my presentation, but I wanted to point out this concept of webhooks. So if we enter data into one tenant, if a webhook is available, our tools can trigger that to create an event and immediately process that information. In some areas we have the webhooks, in some areas we don't. So again, we often refer to these as these events that happen as triggers, and that's made possible via webhooks. Okay. All right, now to talk about our solution. And when we set this presentation up initially, or when I created this presentation, the primary use case that we developed the solution around was for Procore-to-ACC data exchange. Since then, we have had requests of actually doing, I'll even call it an advanced bridge. between Autodesk to Autodesk, so ACC to ACC. So we do support more than just the Procore-to-ACC. If you're working with other clients of yours, consultants of yours that are on the Autodesk Construction Cloud and you're on the Autodesk Construction Cloud, we can still utilize our solution to exchange data between the same platform, but different Autodesk hubs. So our solution does support unidirectional and bidirectional connections, meaning, hey, if we've got some information that we're entering in, like the source of the data enters in Procore, and then we want that to share to Autodesk, that would be a unidirectional, it's a one-way data push. And then if we want to then enter in some information, maybe update or close an item out in the Construction Cloud and have that communicate back to Procore, we can also push that data back to the Procore environment, which is a bidirectional connection. The focus of this presentation is really on our integration, but this same tool, our IMAGINiT Pulse tool, which is really just our exchange platform, for lack of a better term, really it's a middleware solution. We are able to process and migrate data as well. So if you happen to be in a position where you're moving off of, say, Procore, and you want to recreate historic projects or even active projects that are in Procore in the Autodesk Construction Cloud, our Pulse tool allows us to do that unidirectional push from Procore into ACC, which is, we consider that more of a migration strategy than an integration. Really, the purpose of this presentation today is to provide you a solution where you're actively working with external Procore or ACC hubs, and you want that in a live project scenario, you want data to be automatically exchanged between those disparate hubs, so you're getting up-to-date information without having to do manual data entry. So some of the data points that we have definitely tested, we've accomplished this through many of our client projects, but these are really the primary, we'll call them tools or data points that we're currently exchanging, and that's due to those APIs, as I mentioned earlier, the availability of APIs on both the Procore side and the Autodesk side. So for an integration case, we might not be pushing, like say a new project is created in Procore. Sure, through our integration, we can actually create the project in ACC based on your existing project template. Chances are you've already manually or already created a project based on your project template in the Autodesk Construction Cloud, and we're essentially mapping the Procore project from your external consultant to your environment within ACC. So probably the top 3 lines with projects, companies, and users aren't as relevant for integration because you've already got that sort of set up in your own environment, and you might have different companies and different users in your own environment that you don't want to be logging in or synchronized to the Procore environment. So we have some control there. Generally, for integration, we're really not supporting at least a user exchange or a project exchange. In some cases, we want company information to be synchronized, and we support that. But in most use cases that I've supported, there's probably very minimal synchronization for those top 3 lines. Maybe there's an initial, like that unidirectional push just to build out a vendor list or build out a user list within your tenant. But beyond that, it's not like we're constantly trying to sync users between environments. I'm sure you guys are probably, some of you might be thinking of a solution or a case where you do want to constantly sync companies and users, which is great because we're able to do it. It's just not a common use case that we've run into. Beyond that though, we're really getting into sort of the meat and potatoes of a project. So when we're talking about document exchange, drawings, RFIs, submittals, photos, observations, punch items, those are all areas that we can actively support in a data sync. So, and we can even get pretty granular with that. If, say, your general contractor is in Procore and you're the architect consultant that's using the Autodesk Construction Cloud, there might be some folders that the general contractor is more than happy to share with you and then they might have some folders that you're restricted from. We can designate, just based on sort of general permission templates in Procore that you're assigned to, any of the native files and areas that you have visibility to. We can create a live data connection. So if your general contractor is uploading contract information, or whatever it might be, insurance, who knows, any type of file or document to their own native documents area in Procore, as long as we're looking at those folders and we've got that set up, we can automatically kind of create that bridge between Procore documents and files in Autodesk. Same concept, same idea with drawings. There are a few limitations just based on how Procore deals with things like drawing sets, and Autodesk deals with sheet collections. I can get into the weeds on that if it comes up in a question, but generally, if a drawing is updated in Procore, we do have the ability to then sync that new version, that new published version of that drawing into the sheets area of Autodesk. For RFIs and submittals, these are probably the two primary ones that our solution supports, like commonly requested from our clients. Like, hey, we don't want to have to respond to an RFI in Procore in the general contractor's environment and then have to recreate that RFI or our own internal review process in Autodesk. That's one of those things that through automation, our solution, and I'll get into the workflows of how we can bridge the RFIs from Procore into ACC. I'll get into that in detail. Or if it's again, if say your client or your consultants in ACC, same concepts for both RFIs and submittals. And then for photos, again, we can synchronize photos from either tenant, Procore or ACC to an ACC environment. So we're supporting photos that are entered in one environment to synchronize to the Photos tool or the file structure in the Autodesk Construction Cloud. I do want to emphasize that concept. So in Procore, the Photos tool has the ability to create albums. So almost like a subfolder structure to the Photos tool in Procore. Autodesk doesn't have the equivalent. So we're either taking all of the photos that are entered in Procore and synchronizing them to the Photos tool in Autodesk. There are some things that we found that we can do. If Procore does have a photo album, we can tag the photos in ACC with that photo album name to make it easier to filter down to those albums. But if you're familiar with the Autodesk Construction Cloud and specifically the photo gallery in Autodesk, you know that there really aren't any permission restrictions to photos, and some folks don't like that, but we do know that the file area in Autodesk does have permission restrictions. So if we want to apply permissions to, say, a photo album, then instead of synchronizing the photos from Procore into the native photo gallery in the Autodesk Construction Cloud, we can synchronize those to a photos folder structure within the ACC environment with subfolders that represent the photo albums in Procore. And then as an admin, you can control the permissions on who can see those albums and who can't. And then finally, for a couple of items here, there are more items and observations and punch lists that we can support and push to the issues tool in ACC, but I would say the primary two that we get requests from are really observations that are entered into Procore and assigned to a user in your company that then you want to support in your ACC environment. So both observations and punch lists, we're able to kind of map those over to the issues tool in ACC and capture the assignees and track the progress of them if you have internal workflows that you want to support with those couple of items. So some of the current limitations, and this is generally because we just don't have API access primarily on the Autodesk side, but there are some areas in Procore that we don't have access to. ACC correspondence, so the correspondence tool in Autodesk is the equivalent of the email tool in Procore. We don't have APIs on the email tool in Procore. We don't have APIs to even get or post to ACC correspondence. So there's a limitation there. Same goes for transmittals. Transmittals in Procore, we have limited APIs, and we don't have any APIs on the Autodesk Construction Cloud to support the creation of transmittals. Same really goes for specifications. So again, Procore does have some APIs for the specification tool in Procore. In Autodesk, I'll call it a somewhat newer feature, the specifications tool in ACC. We don't have the ability to publish specifications via APIs in ACC, so that's a limitation. And even if it weren't, even if we could publish to the specifications tool, they're using a completely different OCR system to process specifications. So I probably wouldn't trust it, especially for integration. But what ideally, and we're looking into this, what we hope to support in the future is if the specifications module tool, whatever you want to call it, in Procore is updated with new specs, that we're at least grabbing, say, a PDF version of the spec and then writing it to a file folder over in the Autodesk Construction Cloud. So we're hopeful, and as Autodesk evolves, they are opening up more APIs that we have access to, but currently the specifications tool is not one that we can do much with or anything at this moment. And same goes for meetings and schedule. So meetings in Procore, we cannot get anything from the meetings tool to push it into an Autodesk equivalent meeting. They're formatted differently, but we can't even get the PDF of the meeting minutes to synchronize automatically. So that's one area that if you did want to have copies of the meeting minutes, you would have to request those and post the PDFs to your ACC project manually. The same goes for schedule. If schedules are being updated, generally that's not a huge concern because say your general contractor is in Procore, they're managing the schedule. It's really a glorified, we'll call it a viewer of the schedule, even in Procore. It's not like you can make changes to it. That's done generally through external applications like Primavera P6 or Microsoft Project. If your general contractor is open to sharing those files with you, then you can import them directly into ACC, and as you receive new copies of the schedule, it's native to ACC to just import over the top, and then you get versioning and comparisons within the schedule view of the Autodesk Construction Cloud. One that I don't have listed here are forms. So currently, both daily logs and forms in Procore, they have their own kind of form mechanism that doesn't align to the Autodesk mechanism for forms. There are a couple of workarounds, again, that we're exploring. We just this week or last week, we started looking at ways to export things like daily logs via APIs to PDF, and then just store those in a file folder within the Autodesk project. I think we're pretty close to that, and it would be potential for integration. So if you're filling out your daily logs in the Procore environment, then once they're submitted, we're hopeful that it will automatically basically take the PDF version of the daily log and store it in your ACC project. But that's something that we're currently working on. Cool. All right, so enough of the limitations. I want to share some workflows. I would love to do a live demo to show you a creation of an RFI and say Procore environment, have it exchanged over to an Autodesk environment. But there's kind of a lot that goes into the setup of that, and there's a lot of nuance in how different clients actually want that communication or those workflows to be set up. So instead of trying to live demo to meet everyone's needs, I created a couple of kind of general, we'll call them workflow charts that I want to go through. And hopefully if you guys do have questions, I'll be able to answer them around how we set this up. But for RFIs and submittals, the workflows are very similar. So I'll use the example, and I've actually mapped out a more specific example, like a Procore-to-ACC RFI workflow and how that works. But generally, when an RFI is created in one system, whether that's ACC or Procore, The manager of that item generally then assigns it either a template workflow in Procore or an RFI type or a submittal template in ACC. What we're looking for, like what that webhook or that triggering event that we're kind of watching for, is when that item gets assigned to a reviewer in our that's part of our destination hub. And primarily we do this with an email domain. So say general contractor at Acme Contractors is in the Procore environment and they're managing the RFI, and architect at architect.com is one of the reviewers that's part of their review process. The manager on the Procore side, so we'll just call them the GC user, when they're ready to open that RFI and assign it to the architect, we're looking for that assignment to our domain user that we've set this integration up for, and that will trigger that information to then kind of queue it to create the RFI in the ACC environment, in your ACC environment. So if you're the architect, general contractor assigns or creates an RFI, assigns the architect as part of that review. As soon as it hits that architect reviewer as part of that RFI workflow, that's when we're looking for, or that's when we're triggering that data exchange to then support the workflow in your own native environment. So the RFI is created and assigned to the client. Pulse processes that activity. It automatically creates the RFI in the native environment. And not only does it create it, but it also captures any of the attached file information, the question in the RFI, and then it opens it up to the manager in your tenant to then decide, all right, what is the RFI type? What's the actual workflow? Who do I need this to go through internally to complete our step of that RFI process? So once the manager determines that, you push it through your own kind of native RFI workflow within the Autodesk Construction Cloud environment. The reviewer responds so they can answer it. It goes back to your own internal RFI manager. At that point, the RFI manager can either return it back to the internal reviewer or they can choose to close that RFI. So if it was answered appropriately, if the attachments and documentation that were required in the response of the RFI are included, the manager of the RFI can then close and distribute that in your own internal system. At that point, we're looking for that activity, that close activity on that RFI to then send that answer back to the Procore environment. What might be confusing here, and hopefully my little example lays this out more clearly. So zoom into this. So this top line is really all of the activity that might be happening in a Procore RFI, and the bottom area is what happens over in the Autodesk side for this example. So really everything I just talked about, someone creates an RFI in Procore, the manager in the Procore environment determines the workflow and assigns it to the appropriate reviewers of their own review template in Procore. I wanted to include a multi-step review for that RFI in my example because we can designate it to look for the review step that pertains to your use case. So you might have a 3-step, or the general contractor might have a 3-step RFI workflow. It will only exchange and create that RFI in your own native ACC environment once it hits your review step. So say the manager says, yes, this is a 3-step approval. I needed to go through the owner before it goes to the architect. So owner reviews it and says, okay, yeah, here's my answer to it. Goes to the next step, which I'll call the external. That at that point, as long as we have that domain user assigned to that review step number 2, then our Pulse tool will exchange that information to ACC, push it to the manage step. So I kind of boxed out, I grayed out the initial create RFI and open RFI steps within the native ACC workflow. So we're doing that through the API. We're able to get the status into the correct spot. Manager gets notified that, hey, you've received this RFI from your general contractor. They can then review it and say, all right, what is the appropriate internal review that I want to assign to this? They assign that. It goes through the native review process. in Autodesk, and then upon closing it, our answer, technically it goes back to review step 2, but upon answering review step 2 in Procore, it would just push it to review step 3. So essentially, if we have a 3-step review that's required, it would go through step 1, native to Procore, step 2, assigned to our company that has to deal with it in Autodesk. So then we deal with it in Autodesk. When we answer or close that out, it responds with the answer over here in the Procore environment. From there, the Procore manager then can review all of the answers from steps 1, 2, and 3, the documentation, and then deal with it accordingly. So if they say, hey, this is an adequate response, they close it, they distribute it in Procore. If they have to kick it back to any step, that's fine. There is one sort of limitation. I won't even call it a limitation. It's more of just a workflow item there. If they happen to kick it back to you in a review step, instead of being able to kind of reopen a closed RFI in your ACC environment, what we'll do is we'll create a new RFI with a revision and all of the supporting data that's associated to that RFI. So it does create it as kind of a new RFI request in your system. We can append a Rev 1, Rev 2 to the ends of those. But the reason that generally we cannot reopen an existing one is unless we're assigned as an RFI manager and we set up a little service account to deal with this back and forth. If we're an RFI manager in the ACC hub, then technically, yes, we would be able to reopen the RFI, but it won't necessarily push it back to the correct step. So we just kind of found that the general solution there is just create a Rev, push it into the manager's ball and court, and then proceed with it. So you might get multiple revisions to the same RFI that's coming from Procore, but trying to do things in a one-size-fits-all approach, that was the solution that we came up with. If there's nuance to that, or if you have different requests, we are able to restructure and redefine these processes in more detail, which we do for pretty much every integration client that we support. So I'm just using one example here that I feel like is probably our primary use case, but we've dealt with ACC to ACC requests to exchange data from one ACC hub to another. And when we get into kind of those requests, we might have some more customization or things like how are we naming the RFI or the submittal that we do generally support through our integration. So unless there's restriction on very specific APIs that we can't do things, we are able to really accomplish quite a bit and restructure this and detail it out to meet your needs. RFIs are a bit more open than submittals. Submittals are tough because we can't template review types for submittals. We don't have APIs for creating them. If you're aware of the ACC environment, even in a project template setting, you cannot store submittal review types or submittal review templates within a project template. So they can change pretty drastically from project to project. We have supported this in some ways. So if you say your general contractor opens up or assigns you a submittal and you want it to match a review template automatically, and instead of going directly to a manager in a submittal, it automatically kicks it into the first review step. We're getting very close, and I think we're pretty much there on mapping, at least from ACC, we can read the review template that's assigned in one environment. And as long as the name of the review template is exactly the same as the destination project, we're then able to assign that template in the destination, which then allows us to, instead of pushing it to the manager step of the submittal, we can get it right into the review step of the submittal. We have done that, or we've already done that with RFI types because those can be stored in project templates. So my example here pushes it to the manager step of the RFI, but we have successfully done that where if, say Procore, they have RFI template set up and they're named specifically to architectural, civil, whatever, and they assign it in Procore, as long as the equivalent RFI type name is set up in ACC, we are able to push that into an open in review step. So instead of it having to go through a manager in your ACC environment, we can push it right into a review step. So hopefully that clarifies what the solution does. Again, it can be very difficult to show this data exchange. I might be able to pull up some of our test examples in areas where we're trying to get metadata like timestamps or who was all involved in the workflow. We're writing a lot of that metadata that we don't have fields for in ACC. We're just logging it in your activity log of the Autodesk environment. So if you kind of just generally need to see, hey, when did this RFI actually get created in Procore, and then when were we assigned to it, you'll be able to see things like the timestamps associated from Procore to that item. And yeah, beyond that, maybe if there were other review steps involved in Procore, you'd be able to see, oh, hey, that went through the mechanical or structural engineer before it got to our environment. So hopefully that helps to describe. I do have another workflow specifically for submittals because they are a bit different in the Autodesk environment, but generally same concepts. If a submittal is created in either Procore or ACC, the manager is going to open that. They're going to assign a responsible contractor, request documents. Once that contractor uploads the documents, the submittal manager at that point reviews them, and then if they're valid documents, valid upload, then they will assign a workflow to that submittal. At that point, we're looking for that activity to then trigger the exchange of data. And as I mentioned before with kind of the review templates and stuff, right now, we have it getting to the point in ACC just prior to the review, and then it stops. If we have review templates, like I mentioned, we're very close, if not there, on getting it to go right into a review state. But I would say right now, the safe way that we've been doing it is we'll just push it into ACC as an open submittal, basically waiting for the manager to apply the review template to it or manually apply the reviewers to that item, which honestly, a lot of people prefer that anyway, because they want to look at the submittal before they assign it to a specific template and not depend on or rely on the general contractor picking the proper workflow. So same idea, just goes through your native multi-step submittal approval process. Once it's closed and distributed in the Autodesk environment, then Pulse will pull for the activity that has been closed, push it back to Procore as the answer, or push it back to the external ACC environment as answered, and then the manager on the other end will be able to review that and either push it back or close it. In all cases, once it's closed, so say your company is step 2 of a 3-step series, once it's closed in the external tenant, we're automatically looking for that close in the external, and then we're pushing any attachments back to your submittal item or your RFI item over in your environment. So if you're the first step in a 3-step process, you want to get that final submittal when they go to close it. So we're making sure we're pushing the files and attachments over back to your environment and assigning them to the proper item upon closing it. So if there are updates to whatever you reviewed, the PDFs that you reviewed, the photos that you've attached or anyone else has attached, we're capturing all of that information back. Cool, so we're 40 minutes in. Let me see, I've got a couple of other things. So to talk about the services here, and then we'll get into questions. So I probably already kind of explained a bit of our discovery or what we want to kind of learn, because this is a very customized solution depending on your requirements and how you want to exchange the data between different tenants. We like to have a little planning and configuration period where we'll work with you and your team, and we'll try to understand specifically what those workflows are. we'll work through and make sure that our scripts are aligned and configured to your requests. We'll kind of pilot this, we'll run some tests, and usually that takes participation from not only your team, but also your consultant, whoever you're integrating with, to just understand that, hey, just to make sure we have this stuff right, we'll have a half-hour call. We'll kind of run through an example, make sure that everything is being exchanged properly. And based on that feedback, we'll go back to the drawing board, tweak some things within our scripts and how we have the integration service set up. But then ultimately, once we've gone through that planning and configuration process and the pilot process, then we're ready to go live and basically turn on the activity for reviewing activity, monitoring activity within either the Procore-ACC environment so that this data exchange happens automatically. Within our service, so we have different pricing tiers and stuff. I'll allow you guys, if you're interested, I've got some context stuff at the end of my presentation here, but part of our service is we have integration support built into the service. So if you do run into issues or if you have feedback and things need to be tweaked that we didn't capture on the initial configuration, we put in support time in our service to be able to support that throughout the duration of your subscription to the integration service. And yeah, generally things have been going really well, and we've got great feedback from our integration service. Any negative feedback is generally due to just the APIs not being available to accomplish exactly what a client wants to do, but we've become really good at knowing what our limitations are and communicating that up front. So even if you're interested in this, we'll set up, we call it a pre-sales call to really understand kind of generally what you're trying to do. And if there are any areas that we don't feel comfortable with or that we know APIs don't exist, we'll be very upfront with you and tell you, we wish we could do that, but currently we cannot. So our goal here is not to mislead anyone and try to promote this as a be-all, end-all solution to capture all of the project data flow between two environments. So really wanted to highlight the areas that we are strong in and mention the things that we're working on to improve and update. And again, I mentioned it earlier, a lot of that really relies on the APIs and what Autodesk releases and what Procore releases and updates. So if you're familiar with Autodesk, that can happen very quickly. Like they can respond and open up new APIs, and then it's great. We can improve our process. Other times it might take months and months for API updates to come out. And they're generally, sometimes they're aligned with the feature updates to the Autodesk Construction Cloud, but a lot of times we'll just randomly see an API update. And then, once we see that something is rolled out, we'll do our best to update our scripts in the background, our development of the tool, and communicate to everyone that, hey, what we said was limited before, we can now support it, and we'll just roll out those updates as they come in. So, yep. All right. Great. So at this point, perfect. 40. I'm usually not this good on timing. I usually like to keep 15 minutes for Q&A at the end of these presentations, and I hit it right on the mark today. So I will open up for any questions that might be coming in. And Sarah, I don't know that I have, I'm not seeing the Q&A panel.
Okay, I have it open. It looks like there's one question right now, and if anyone else has a question, just a reminder, you can type it into that questions pane, and Vince can field it for you. But right now it says, can Pulse move files between ACC projects that are in different regions? Example, between a project on the US servers and one on the EU servers?
So I don't want to say with absolute certainty, but I'm pretty confident in saying that yes, we can. The one thing, and I can show some kind of background to our Pulse environment. The one thing we really rely on to map the projects is really just a project ID, and that's not restricted by the servers. So honestly, we don't necessarily care where the data is hosted as long as we have access to APIs, which I know the different servers. Right now, I think Autodesk expanded to new regions for the servers, and they're currently supporting, I believe it's only Autodesk Docs. It might be some, I have to look into it to see if BIM Collaborate Pro is supported, but I would say with, I'll call it 90% certainty, we would be able to basically create a bridge between an EU server and an American server or US server. Was that the only question?
Yep, that looks like it's the only one. Not seeing anything else right now.
So I'm gonna go in here. I know this is probably not too beneficial, but I'll kind of show you guys the back end that we deal with to set this up. So generally, if I'll go to my Autodesk environment, I don't think I have any live integrations. We have a Procore sandbox that we deal with quite a bit, but basically in the back end with Pulse, and for integrations, our goal is to make this a UI that our clients are able to manage. So if you subscribe to our Pulse integration service and say you had up to 20 projects per year, we're going to allow you a login to sort of manage the mapping of your projects to whatever external tenants. We need to clean up the UI and make it a little bit more user-friendly to support, especially if you're dealing with multiple external environments. But essentially, this process is us just looking at the project ID. We have a number of scripts that we perform. So let me see if I go to my mappings page, this will be more clear. So like something like this, it's showing that we're mapping from a Procore environment to an ACC environment. And in the background, when we set that up, we just basically map the project ID from Procore to the ACC project to create that connection. And then we have a number of different settings that we set to support how these are going to integrate. So yeah, if we're looking at like file folders or pushing things to support folders like RFIs for attachments, we just have the folder paths listed out here, and we can modify that. But the big thing that we're looking for in connecting like a project ID to a project ID or a hub ID to a hub ID is all supported through our settings page. So I don't think there would be any restrictions on the file exchange, but I'm not one of our developers. I don't know the limitations of maybe some security protocols between data exchange in the cloud, you know, the backend stuff between the different servers. But again, I'm pretty confident if we can move it from a Procore data source to an Autodesk data source, then we should be able to move it from two separate Autodesk servers, which are really just on the AWS. Cool. Let me go accelerate. I'll throw in another nugget. We'll probably have a follow-up webinar. So a totally unrelated tool, but now that we're really digging into the Autodesk APIs and creating new solutions like this. I was at AU last week, and one thing that we called it our soft launch of a new admin tool called Accelerate, IMAGINiT Accelerate. And this tool in particular is meant to assist account admins on doing some of the more mundane and kind of time-consuming tasks that are not difficult, but they just take a lot of clicking and a lot of time, and generally are just kind of annoying when you're managing a project environment. Let me see here. So if I've answered all the questions on the integration, you know, and you guys don't care about admin tools, you're free to jump off. But I figure, hey, with 10 minutes, we did our soft launch at AU last week, so I'll show you a little bit of what we're working on for a new tool here. So
hey Vince, I'm going to interrupt you real quick. There was one more question that just came in just before you get started on Accelerate, and it says, can you push documents like drawings, RFIs, submittals from Procore to ACC when it's listed as approved state in Procore?
Yeah, so when we initially set the integration up, if it's already approved, like if something is already complete and we didn't set the integration up prior to that, what we do is we just do a one-time data push to pull, like basically migrate that data from Procore into ACC. So if things are closed, we definitely have the ability to pull all of those closed items, approved items over into your tenant. So kind of doing like a data backup, but absolutely we can do that.
Okay. And then one last one. Should we assume there's integration service needed on every project?
So, I mean, it's hard for me to answer that. If you want this tool to work from project to project, then yeah, there's that pulse environment. So if your integrations or your requests to workflows are very consistent, then generally once we have all of the scripts and sort of the processing set up, things should not change drastically. We might have to, and that's why we have that service component associated to our service, like our support component associated to the service. If there are little details or nuanced changes that we need to make, we can go in and support those. But we do sell this in kind of a project tier-based pricing. So I think I don't want to stay off the top of my head, I should know this, but I believe kind of our entry tier is like a 1 to 5 project bucket. So if you were to purchase the 1 to 5, you would be able to integrate to up to 5 external projects, or external, I should call them endpoints. So that would allow you to have 5 projects actively mapped within that license or that subscription tier. And then we go up from there. I think we've got like a 6 to 20 and so on. So, but if the question is more on like the nuance of the setup and the detail of the setup, every project that we've integrated with definitely has nuance that we need to go in there and maybe change some statuses or triggers or polling times on the ACC side. So, but we're here to support that, absolutely. All right. Yeah, so our admin tools, I'll go through this very quickly. I should be able to download it in like less than 10 minutes. But I know one of the common pain points that we have from our ACC admin users is like generally there's no mechanism to do things like bulk import, bulk add, bulk remove users from your Autodesk environment. So our tools allow that. So we basically open up the ability for an admin user with a login to our Accelerate tool to be able to, under user management here, account users, if I wanted to import, say you have an external database of users that you want to, you're setting up your Autodesk environment and you don't want to manually go through, put all the emails in, you can copy and paste multiple emails, but setting their roles, setting their companies can be a very time-consuming process. We've created some import templates via spreadsheets that allow you to basically fill out all of that information in the spreadsheet, start the import, and bring in all of those users with the proper email, role, and company. So auto-populates all of those things. We can also export your current directory out of Autodesk to the same kind of spreadsheet format if you need that. Same concept on the company side. So if you're new to Autodesk and you've got an ERP or something that has all of your companies already in a directory, and you want to export that out of your ERP solution and then import all of those companies with the same names and with the ERP IDs assigned to them in Autodesk, we have the same concept, same mechanism where we have an import spreadsheet. So you can copy and paste those companies from whatever export you're getting out of, say, an ERP solution, import them into Autodesk, and in minutes rather than taking hours and hours of time to manually add company by company. Then for the really cool features in here under project users, this is a big one that we've gotten requests from for the last several years. Like, hey, why doesn't Autodesk allow us to bulk remove or bulk add users to projects? Well, our Accelerate tool does that. So if I go to add and modify, this gives me a list of all of the current users within our environment. which right now I'm pointing to our IMAGINiT ACC hub, which is littered full of placeholder emails and non-existent people. But if I were to go through and say, hey, I want to add, I'll just use myself. If I want to add Vince to every project in my hub, I can pick my name here. Next, this gives me a full list of all of the projects in our hub. So we've got 622 projects. I can do a bulk select. I'm not going to process this because I don't personally want to get added to all of these projects, but add to the projects, assign the role. If I already have a default role in my Autodesk environment, I can say, hey, just use their default role. If I want to add additional roles, we're able to then pick and choose from our role list to add additional roles to that user upon adding them to these projects. And then also under assign products, if I wanted to give myself, in this case, access to build and cost for all of these projects, I simply click the product and move on. This does give you a little preview before you go to start that process. So, hey, I'm adding this user to all 622 of the selected projects. I'm including these 4 products, and I'm not going to click this start, but if I were to click start, it would start to run through adding me as a user to all of those projects, which if you know, if you've used ACC and you're familiar with this, like this can be extremely time consuming. Right now, the only solution is to open up each project one at a time and add the users to it. So we felt like this was a great tool to accomplish that. The inverse of that, if we wanted to remove any user, search for myself again. If I wanted to bulk remove a user, maybe it's an employee that moved on or a subcontractor that's no longer in the project, you can search for their username, remove them from any of the projects that they are a member of. So this is going to give me a list of all of the projects that that member is a member of, and then we can do a bulk remove or pick and choose which projects we want to remove them from. I'm not going to start that because then it would remove me from all of these projects. So, and then finally, I'm not going to get into detail with security audit with 2 minutes left, but we do have a ball in court. So this has been a common request as well, primarily for those cases where maybe you fired a subcontractor from your job and you hired a new subcontractor. Well, you want to replace the old user with the person that's responsible for those activities, the new user. This ball in court allows us to pick a user, replace them with a different user, go here, and then so it looks like the one I picked only was probably included in a few projects, but hey, we're going to swap the one user out with a different one. And let me see, let's go for all of those. Again, I'm not going to process this, but the few areas right now that we have API access to that kind of ball in court are for Autodesk forms, issue assignments. So if you're assigned to an issue and you want to swap a user out, or for RFIs, either manager or reviewers, we can swap those, coordinator as well. So we can swap those users out for those workflows. And limited on submittals. I can't remember the exact limitations there, but I believe submittals we're able to swap and manage reviewer, because that's the only assignment that you can make in the settings for submittals is the manager of the submittal. So if you had to swap a submittal manager, you would be able to do so with our tool here. We're also looking into including the reviews, so design reviews and docs. We're looking to do the ball in court swap for those assignments as well. And I believe we've looked into it. I think we do have the APIs to do that. Our lead developer is out on PTO and hasn't been able to update that yet, but hopefully that will be included as well. If you're really interested in this tool, we haven't done an official release of this yet, but it will be coming in the next couple of weeks. So again, just like the Pulse integration stuff, if you do have any questions or if you're interested in being one of our first beta customers for the Accelerate tool, please reach out to your IMAGINiT sales executive or email Sarah, who is listed here on this slide, and we'll be sure to follow up and give you the proper information. on either the integration, the Pulse integration tool, or the ACC, sorry, IMAGINiT Accelerate. Sorry, have to get used to it. The IMAGINiT Accelerate solution.
Awesome. Thank you, Vince. All right, we are going to wrap up for the day. And just a quick reminder that the presentation was recorded, and you'll receive a copy of that probably sometime next week. And thank you so much for your time today, and have a good rest of your week.
Thanks, everyone.